What happens when a single photograph hidden in a billionaire's wallet unravels 5 decades of carefully buried secrets? When a moment of carelessness exposes the truth that powerful people would kill to keep hidden? For Isabella Rodriguez, of her 28-year-old waitress at the Grand Metropolitan, Chicago's most exclusive hotel, that moment came on a cold November evening when a leather wallet slipped from the pocket of hotel mogul Jonathan Ashworth. For Jonathan, a man whose empire was built on the foundation of a devastating lie, it was the beginning of the end of everything he thought he knew about his life. She was just trying to return a lost item to a wealthy guest. He was just another, entitled billionaire who saw service workers as invisible. But when Isabella opened that wallet and saw a faded photograph of the mother she'd lost 53 years ago, a simple act of honesty would shatter 2 lives and expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of power. This isn't a story about coincidence. This is about stolen childhoods, manufactured tragedies, and the photograph that would prove that sometimes the most precious things aren't lost, they're taken. The marble lobby of the Grand Metropolitan gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Isabella Rodriguez moved between tables in the hotel's exclusive Platinum Lounge. At 8 p.m. on a Tuesday, the space was filled with Chicago's elite. Oil executives, tech moguls, politicians, all conducting million-dollar deals over 30-year-old Scotch and imported caviar. Isabella had worked at the Grand Metropolitan for 3 years, long enough to become invisible to the wealthy guests who frequented the hotel's most exclusive spaces. Her black uniform was impeccable, her service flawless, and her ability to blend into the background legendary among the staff. She'd learned that survival in this world meant being helpful without being memorable, present without being noticed. Ashworth Group had reserved the entire Platinum Lounge for their quarterly board meeting, and the tension in the room was palpable. Isabella had overheard fragments of heated conversations about hostile takeovers, market volatility, and the precarious position of several major investments. At the center of it all sat Jonathan Ashworth, the 72-year-old patriarch whose hotel empire spanned 6 continents. Ashworth commanded attention without effort. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit immaculate, and his pale blue eyes held the kind of cold intelligence that had built fortunes and destroyed competitors for over 4 decades. He spoke in measured tones about market projections, while his associates hung on every word, clearly aware that their own fortunes rose and fell with his approval. Isabella was clearing glasses from a nearby table when she noticed the commotion. Ashworth had stood abruptly during a heated exchange with his nephew Richard, and in his haste, a brown leather wallet had slipped from his jacket pocket, landing silently on the Persian rug beneath his chair. She waited until the group had moved to the bar area, their voices raised in what sounded like a family argument about succession planning. Moving quickly, Isabella retrieved the wallet, noting its expensive craftsmanship and the weight of what felt like numerous credit cards and documents inside. Protocol demanded that she immediately return the item to Mr. Ashworth, but something made her hesitate. Perhaps it was the way he'd snapped at the younger server earlier, berating her for bringing him the wrong brand of mineral water. Perhaps it was the dismissive way he treated anyone who couldn't write him a 7-figure check. Or perhaps it was simply curiosity about what the most powerful hotel magnate in the country carried in his personal effects. Isabella glanced around the lounge, ensuring she was unobserved, then carefully opened the wallet. Inside were the expected items: platinum credit cards, a driver's license, business cards from world leaders and celebrities. But tucked behind everything else, worn and faded with age, was a small black-and-white photograph. The image was clearly decades old, the edges soft with wear and handling. It showed a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes, holding a small child, a little girl of perhaps 3 or 4 years old. The woman was smiling at the camera with the radiant joy of motherhood, while the child looked up at her with obvious adoration. Isabella's hands began to tremble as she stared at the photograph. The woman's face was achingly familiar, though. She'd seen it only in her own faded memories and the single photograph she kept beside her bed. It was her mother, Maria Rodriguez, who had supposedly died in a car accident when Isabella was 4 years old. But this wasn't a photograph Isabella had ever seen before. And the child in the picture, while clearly very young, looked nothing like Isabella's own baby photos. This child had lighter hair, paler skin, and was wearing expensive clothing that Isabella's working-class family could never have afforded. Isabella's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Why would Jonathan Ashworth, a billionaire hotel mogul, be carrying a photograph of her dead mother? And who was the child in the picture? "Excuse me, miss." The voice was sharp, authoritative, and very close to her ear. Isabella spun around to find Richard Ashworth, Jonathan's nephew, standing behind her with an expression of barely controlled fury. At 38, Richard was a younger, hungrier version of his uncle, ambitious, ruthless, and currently staring at the wallet in Isabella's hands with undisguised alarm. "I believe you have something that belongs to my uncle," Richard said, his voice low but threatening. "I was just about to return it," Isabella stammered, quickly closing the wallet and extending it toward him. It fell from his pocket. Richard snatched the wallet from her hands, his eyes never leaving her face. "And you felt it was appropriate to go through his personal belongings?" "I wasn't going through anything," Isabella lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I was just checking for identification so I could return it to the right person." Richard's smile was cold and calculating. "Of course you were. What's your name?" "Isabella Rodriguez." Something flickered across Richard's face at the mention of her surname, so quickly that Isabella almost missed it. But it was there. Recognition, shock, and something that might have been fear. "Rodriguez," he repeated slowly. "How long have you worked here, Isabella?" 3 years. "And where are you from originally?" The question seemed oddly personal, but Isabella was too shaken by the photograph to think clearly. "Chicago. I've lived here my whole life." Richard nodded thoughtfully, then reached into his own jacket and withdrew a business card. "Isabella, I think there might be an opportunity for advancement in your future. Call me tomorrow." Before Isabella could respond, Richard turned and walked back toward the bar, where Jonathan was still engaged in heated conversation with the other board members. Isabella watched as Richard approached his uncle, leaning in to whisper something in his ear while discreetly returning the wallet. Jonathan's reaction was immediate and dramatic. His face went pale, then flushed with anger as he listened to whatever Richard was telling him. His pale blue eyes swept the room until they found Isabella standing frozen by the cleared table with his empty glasses still in her hands. For a moment that felt like eternity. Jonathan Ashworth stared at Isabella Rodriguez across the expanse of the Platinum Lounge. In his gaze, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Not just anger at her violation of his privacy, but a kind of recognition that suggested this wasn't their first encounter. But that was impossible. Isabella would have remembered meeting one of the most powerful men in Chicago, wouldn't she? Jonathan said something sharp to Richard, then strode purposefully toward the elevator bank. The board meeting was apparently over, and from the expressions on the other executives' faces, it hadn't ended well. Richard lingered, making his way over to Isabella with the predatory grace of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "That call I mentioned," he said quietly. "Make it early, we have a lot to discuss." "I don't understand what—" "Trust me," Richard interrupted, his voice carrying a weight that made Isabella's skin crawl. After tomorrow, you'll understand everything. And Isabella, don't mention tonight's little incident to anyone, for your own sake." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Isabella nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. After the Ashworth group departed, Isabella finished her shift in a daze. The photograph had shaken her to her core, raising questions about her past that she'd never thought to ask. Her mother's death had been the defining tragedy of her childhood. But Isabella had never questioned the official story. Maria Rodriguez had died in a car accident when Isabella was 4. Isabella had been raised by her grandmother, who died when Isabella was 16, leaving her to make her own way in the world. But now, staring at the business card Richard had given her, Isabella wondered if everything she'd been told about her past was a lie. That night, in her small studio apartment, Isabella sat on her bed, staring at the only photograph she had of her mother, a formal portrait taken at a department store, showing Maria holding a very young Isabella. The woman in the picture looked exactly like the woman in Jonathan Ashworth's wallet, but the children were clearly different. Isabella pulled out her laptop and began searching for information about the Ashworth family. What she found was the typical biography of a self-made billionaire. Jonathan Ashworth, born in 1951 to a middle-class family in Michigan, had built his hotel empire from a single property inherited from his father. He'd been married once to socialite Catherine Whitmore, but the marriage had ended in divorce after only 3 years. No children were mentioned in any of the articles, but as Isabella dug deeper, she found something strange. In 1970, when Jonathan would have been 19, there was a gap in his documented history. No college records, no employment, no public appearances. It was as if Jonathan Ashworth had simply vanished for 2 years, only to resurface in 1972 with the capital to purchase his first hotel. Isabella's phone rang, startling her from her research. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Hello, Isabella Rodriguez?" The voice was unfamiliar, elderly, and carried a slight accent. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Elena Santos. I worked for the Rodriguez family many years ago. I think we need to talk." Isabella's grip tightened on the phone. "I don't understand. What Rodriguez family?" "Your mother's family, Mija, before she married your father. Before the accident that wasn't an accident." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. "What are you talking about? My mother died in a car crash." "Your mother died protecting a secret that powerful men would have killed to keep buried," Eleanor interrupted. "And if you've been asking questions about the Ashworth family, you're in more danger than you know. How did you get this number? How do you know about meet me tomorrow at noon? The coffee shop on Halstead near the university. Come alone, and don't tell anyone where you're going, especially not anyone connected to the Ashworths." The line went dead, leaving Isabella staring at her phone in shock. 2 phone calls in one evening, both connected to a photograph she'd seen for 30 seconds in a billionaire's wallet. Either she was losing her mind, or she'd stumbled into something much larger and more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. Isabella barely slept that night, her dreams filled with fragmented images of her mother's face and the sound of Elena Santos's warning about accidents that weren't accidents. She woke with a sense of dread that followed her through her morning routine and into her shift at the Grand Metropolitan. The hotel felt different somehow, as if the luxurious surroundings that had once made her feel sophisticated now felt like a trap. Every wealthy guest made her think of Jonathan Ashworth's cold blue eyes. Every conversation she overheard made her wonder what secrets the powerful were hiding behind their polished facades. At 11:30, Isabella made an excuse to her supervisor about a doctor's appointment and left the hotel. The coffee shop Elena had mentioned was a small family-owned place frequented by university students and professors, the kind of establishment where conversations could be held without attracting attention from the wrong people. Isabella found Elena Santos, sitting in a corner booth, her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold long ago. She was a small woman in her 70s, with silver hair and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "You look just like her," Elena said as Isabella approached. "Like Maria at your age." Isabella slid into the booth across. From Elena, her heart pounding. "You really knew my mother?" "I worked for the Rodriguez family for 23 years, Elena said. "I was Maria's nanny when she was small, and later I became the family housekeeper. I watched her grow up, fall in love, get married, have children." "Children?" Isabella leaned forward. "I was my mother's only child." Elena's expression was infinitely sad. "No, mija, you were not." The world seemed to shift beneath Isabella's feet. "What are you talking about?" Elena reached into her purse and withdrew a manila envelope worn soft with age. "Your mother had twins. You and your sister, Elena, named after me. You were identical, born 3 minutes apart on March 15th, 1995. Isabella's vision blurred. "That's impossible. I would know if I had a twin sister. You were separated when you were 4 years old," Elena continued gently. "After your mother discovered something she wasn't supposed to know, something about the family she worked for." "The family she worked for?" Elena nodded. "The Ashworths. Your mother was their housekeeper for 2 years, from 1999 to 2001. She cleaned their private residences, their offices, handled their personal correspondence. She saw things, heard things that she wasn't supposed to." Isabella felt sick. "What kind of things?" "Financial records that didn't match public filings, phone calls about bribes and cover-ups, documents about a young woman who died under suspicious circumstances in 1970. A woman whose identity Jonathan Ashworth had stolen to build his fortune." The pieces were starting to come together in Isabella's mind, but the picture they formed was too horrific to accept. "You're saying Jonathan Ashworth killed someone?" "I'm saying Jonathan Ashworth became someone," Elena corrected. "The real Jonathan. Ashworth died in a car accident in Michigan in 1970. Your current Jonathan Ashworth was born James Morrison, the son of a convicted embezzler who couldn't get legitimate financing for business ventures. He stole the dead man's identity, his social security number, even his family history." Isabella stared at Elena in shock. "And my mother found out. She found documents proving the identity theft. She was going to take them to the police." Elena's voice broke slightly. "But Jonathan found out what she knew before she could act on it, so he killed her?" "He ordered her death," Elena said, "made it look like an accident. But before she died, Maria made sure you girls were safe. She hid you with different families, gave you different last names, made sure you couldn't be found and eliminated as loose ends." Isabella's hands were shaking uncontrollably. "Then why do I remember being raised by my grandmother? Why do I remember my mother dying when I was 4? Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Because your grandmother, Elena Rodriguez, my sister, agreed to take you in and raise you as her own granddaughter. She created an entire false history for you, complete with fake documents and manufactured memories. You weren't Maria's daughter, Isabella Rodriguez. You were Elena's granddaughter, Isabella Rodriguez, whose mother had died tragically young." The magnitude of the deception was staggering. Isabella's entire life, her entire identity, was built on a foundation of lies designed to protect her from a billionaire's murderous secret. "What about my sister?" Isabella whispered. "What happened to Elena?" Elena reached across the table and took Isabella's trembling hands in her own. "That's the most heartbreaking part, Mia. Elena was adopted by a wealthy family. They changed her name, her history, gave her every advantage money could buy, but they never told her the truth about who she really was. Isabella's mind raced, connecting dots she didn't want to connect. Elena Santos, you said you were named after your mother. If my sister was also named Elena... Elena nodded sadly. Your sister was renamed after her adoption. The family that took her wanted her to blend into their world completely. What name did they give her? Elena was quiet for a long moment, then pulled a newspaper clipping from the envelope. It was a Society page article from 1999, featuring a photograph of a wealthy couple with their newly adopted 4-year-old daughter. The headline read, Ashworth Family Welcomes New Addition, Elena Catherine Ashworth. Isabella stared at the photograph, seeing her own face looking back at her from a child who'd been dressed in expensive clothes and positioned between Jonathan and Catherine Ashworth like a precious accessory. My sister, Isabella whispered. Jonathan Ashworth adopted my sister. He adopted the daughter of the woman he'd murdered, Elena confirmed, renamed her Elena Catherine, raised her as his own child, never telling her that her adoptive father was the man who destroyed her real family. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Jonathan Ashworth hadn't just killed Maria Rodriguez, he'd stolen one of her children and raised her as his own daughter, keeping her close as either a trophy or insurance against future accusations. Where is she now? Isabella asked. Elena. Catherine, where is my sister? Elena's expression was grim. That's why I needed to warn you, mija. Elena Catherine Ashworth died 3 weeks ago. Apparent suicide. She jumped from the roof of the Ashworth Tower downtown. Isabella felt the world tilt around her. No, that's not possible. The official story is that she'd been struggling with depression, that the pressure of being Jonathan Ashworth's heir had become too much for her. But I think she found out the truth about her past. I think she discovered who she really was, and Jonathan Ashworth couldn't let her live with that knowledge. Isabella stared at the newspaper clipping, seeing her sister's face, her own face, smiling, innocently from between their parents' murderers. Elena Catherine Ashworth had lived a life of luxury and privilege, never knowing that she was Isabella Rodriguez's twin sister, never knowing that the man she called father had destroyed their real family. Why are you telling me this now? Isabella asked. Why didn't you come forward before Elena Catherine died? Elena's expression was haunted. Because I was a coward, because I was afraid of what Jonathan Ashworth would do to me, to my own family. But when Elena Catherine died, when I realized he'd killed both of Maria's daughters in the end, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Both daughters. You think you're safe because you've been hidden for 24 years, Elena said. But last night, when you saw that photograph in Jonathan's wallet, when Richard Ashworth recognized your name, they know who you are now, Isabella, and they know you're asking questions. Isabella felt ice in her veins. You think they'll try to kill me too? I think they can't afford to let you live, Elena said bluntly. You're the only person left who can prove what really happened to your mother, who can expose Jonathan's stolen identity and connect him to Elena Catherine's murder. Isabella's mind was reeling. In the space of 12 hours, her entire understanding of her life had been shattered. Her mother hadn't died in an accident. She'd been murdered. She had a twin sister she'd never known, who'd been raised by their mother's killer and then murdered when she got too close to the truth. And now Isabella herself was in mortal danger simply for existing. What am I supposed to do? Isabella. Go to the police. Who's going to believe this story? Elena reached into the envelope and withdrew a small metal key. Your mother hid evidence before she died. Documents, photographs, recordings, everything needed to prove Jonathan's identity theft and connect him to multiple murders. She gave this key to my sister Eleanor before she was killed. What does it open? A safety deposit box at First National Bank, downtown. Box 2847. Your grandmother Eleanor paid the rental fees for 24 years, waiting for the day when you would be old enough and strong enough to handle the truth. Isabella stared at the key, understanding that accepting it meant crossing a line from which there would be no return. If I take this evidence to the authorities, what happens to me, Jonathan? Ashworth will try to destroy you before you can destroy him, Elena said honestly. But you'll have something he doesn't expect, the truth. And sometimes, Mija, the truth is the most powerful weapon we have. Isabella closed her fist around the key, feeling its weight and the weight of her decision. What about you? Won't you be in danger for telling me this? Elena smiled sadly. I'm 73 years old. I've carried this secret for 24 years, and it's been slowly killing me. Whatever happens now, at least I'll know I tried to get justice for Maria and her daughters. As Isabella left the coffee shop with the key burning in her palm and Elena's warnings echoing in her mind, she realized that her simple life as a hotel waitress was over. She was now the last living witness to a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Chicago's power structure, and every step she took from this moment forward would determine whether justice would finally be served or whether Jonathan Ashworth's secrets would be buried along with everyone who threatened to expose them. The safety deposit box at First National Bank contained exactly what Elena had promised, a treasure trove of evidence that Maria Rodriguez had meticulously collected during her 2 years working for the Ashworth family. There were financial documents showing Jonathan's theft of the real Jonathan Ashworth's identity, photographs of falsified papers, even audio recordings of phone conversations where he discussed bribing officials and covering up inconvenient deaths. But the most damning evidence was a letter Maria had written before her death, sealed and notarized, detailing everything she'd discovered about Jonathan's true identity and her fear for her daughter's safety. It was a confession from beyond the grave, written by a woman who'd known she was going to die, but had been determined to protect her children and expose the truth. Isabella spent 3 days studying the contents of the safety deposit box, building a timeline of Jonathan's crimes that spanned over 30 years. The man who called himself Jonathan Ashworth had not only stolen a dead man's identity, he'd murdered at least 4 people who'd threatened to expose him, including Maria Rodriguez and, most recently, Elena Catherine Ashworth. The irony was devastating. Jonathan had raised Isabella's twin sister as his own daughter, never knowing that she was the child of one of his victims. When Eleanor Catherine had apparently discovered the truth about her past, possibly through her own investigation into her adoption records, Jonathan had been forced to eliminate her before she could expose his secrets, armed with Maria's evidence and Elena Santos's testimony. Isabella knew she had everything needed to bring down one of Chicago's most powerful men. But she also knew that Jonathan Ashworth had spent 30 years eliminating threats to his empire, and he wouldn't hesitate to add her name to that list. The question was whether she could get the evidence to the authorities before Jonathan realized how much she knew and took action to silence her permanently. Isabella's answer came sooner than expected. When she returned to the Grand Metropolitan for her next shift, she found Richard Ashworth waiting for her in the employee break room, his expression a mixture of false friendliness and barely contained menace. "Isabella," he said, standing as she entered. "I was hoping we could have that conversation I mentioned. I'm sorry, but I need to start my shift." "I've already spoken to your supervisor," Richard interrupted. "You've been given the evening off. I thought we could take a drive, discuss some opportunities for advancement." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Isabella forced herself to remain calm, even as her hand moved instinctively to the purse where she'd hidden copies of her mother's evidence. "That's very kind, but I really should—" "I insist," Richard said, his smile never wavering, even as his eyes turned cold. "My uncle is very interested in meeting with you. He has some questions about your family history. Isabella felt. Her blood turned to ice. They knew. Somehow, Jonathan Ashworth had connected her to Maria Rodriguez and realized that Isabella was the surviving witness to his crimes. "I'm not sure what you mean," Isabella said, trying to buy time while her mind raced through possible escape routes. "Of course you don't," Richard replied. "But my uncle has an excellent memory for faces, especially when they belong to people who remind him of old employees. He's quite looking forward to reminiscing about the past." Before Isabella could respond, Richard's hand closed around her arm with steel-like grip. "The car is waiting outside. I really think you should come willingly. It would be unfortunate if this became unpleasant." Isabella realized that she was trapped. The evidence she'd gathered was safely hidden in her apartment, but if she disappeared now, it would never see the light of day. Jonathan Ashworth would continue his reign of terror, and her mother's sacrifice would be meaningless. But as Richard began to guide her toward the employee exit, Isabella remembered something Elena Santos had said. "Sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon we have." "Before we go," Isabella said, stopping abruptly, "there's something I need to tell you about Elena Catherine." Richard's grip on her arm tightened. "What about Elena Catherine?" "I know why she really died," Isabella said, her voice carrying clearly through the break room where several other employees were taking their breaks. "I know what she found out about her adoption, about who her real parents were." The effect was immediate. Richard's face went pale, and his eyes darted around the room, noting the other employees who were now listening with obvious interest. "I think we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," he said through gritted teeth. "Elena Catherine wasn't Jonathan Ashworth's daughter," Isabella continued, raising her voice slightly. "She was the daughter of Maria Rodriguez, a housekeeper your uncle had murdered in 1999. Elena Catherine found out the truth about her past, and Jonathan killed her to keep her quiet." The break room had gone completely silent. Several employees had pulled out their phones, clearly sensing that something significant was happening. Richard's mask of civility finally cracked. "You have no idea what you're talking about, and you're about to make a very serious mistake." "The only mistake," Isabella said, pulling out her phone and activating its recording function, "was your uncle thinking he could get away with murder for 30 years. Richard lunged for her phone, but Isabella had anticipated the move. She threw the device to another employee while simultaneously shouting, "Call 911! Tell them Jonathan Ashworth is a murderer and identity thief, and his nephew is trying to kidnap a witness." The break room erupted in chaos as employees scrambled to call for help, while Richard desperately tried to control the situation. But it was too late. Isabella's accusations were already spreading through the hotel's staff, and within minutes the story would be all over social media. Richard realized that his uncle's carefully constructed empire was crumbling in real time. "You stupid girl," he snarled. "You have no idea what you've just done." "I've done what my mother tried to do 24 years ago," Isabella replied, backing toward the break room's main exit. "I've told the truth about Jonathan Ashworth." When the police arrived 20 minutes later, they found Richard Ashworth in the hotel's break room, furiously making phone calls to his uncle's legal team, while Isabella Rodriguez calmly waited to give her statement, surrounded by a group of hotel employees who had witnessed the entire confrontation. The evidence Isabella provided to the authorities was overwhelming. Maria Rodriguez's letter, combined with the financial documents and audio recordings she'd collected, painted a clear picture of Jonathan Ashworth's 30-year crime spree. The identity theft, the murders, the cover-ups, everything was documented. In meticulous detail, Jonathan Ashworth was arrested at his penthouse that evening, his shocked expression suggesting he'd never imagined that the past could catch up with him so completely. The mighty hotel empire he'd built on lies and blood money crumbled within days as investors fled and authorities launched investigations into every aspect of his business dealings. But for Isabella, the most meaningful moment came 3 weeks later, when she stood at Elena Catherine Ashworth's grave and placed a bouquet of white roses next to the headstone. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," she whispered to her twin sister, "but I made sure everyone knows the truth about who you really were." Elena Catherine had been reburied under her real name, Isabella Rodriguez, next to their mother in a small cemetery outside Chicago. The headstone bore a simple inscription, "Beloved daughter and sister, finally home." Isabella had inherited Elena. Catherine's estate, after DNA tests, confirmed their relationship, but she donated the money to organizations that helped victims of violent crime. She'd also established the Maria Rodriguez Foundation, dedicated to protecting witnesses and exposing corruption among the powerful. 6 months after Jonathan Ashworth's arrest, Isabella stood in the same platinum lounge where her life had changed forever. But now she wasn't wearing a server's uniform. She was wearing a business suit, addressing a group of journalists and law enforcement officials about the importance of believing witnesses who spoke truth to power. "My mother died because she tried to expose a powerful man's crimes," Isabella told the assembled crowd. "My sister died because she discovered the truth about her past. But their deaths weren't meaningless, because the truth they died protecting has finally seen the light." In the audience, she spotted Elena Santos, now 83 but still sharp-eyed and proud. The elderly woman nodded approvingly as Isabella continued her speech, knowing that Maria Rodriguez's sacrifice had finally been vindicated. Jonathan Ashworth died in prison 6 months into his life sentence, his empire dismantled, and his crimes exposed for all the world to see. Richard Ashworth was convicted of conspiracy and attempted kidnapping, sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. But the real victory wasn't in their punishment. It was in the knowledge that truth had triumphed over power, that justice had been served for Maria Rodriguez and her daughters, and that the photograph in a billionaire's wallet had ultimately revealed everything he'd tried so desperately to hide. Isabella's story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful weapons against corruption are the simplest ones: courage, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to truth. Her mother's photograph, carried unknowingly by her killer for decades, had become the key that unlocked a conspiracy and brought justice to those who thought they were beyond its reach. The wallet that fell from Jonathan Ashworth's pocket hadn't just contained his secrets. It had contained the evidence of his guilt, preserved in a faded photograph of the woman whose love had been strong enough to protect her daughters, even from beyond the grave. And in the end, that love had proven more powerful than all his billions, because truth, once revealed, cannot be bought, buried, or forgotten. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories where truth, justice, and hidden legacies come to light.